Howdy folks, my name's Zach, you're watching Arclight Miniatures, and today we're going to take you through the process of how I do my red armor. So stay tuned, because we're going to get into this right now. As always, today's video is brought to you by Aries Games and Minis, as well as Camo Specs online. Here we just have a quick little view of the Iron Cheetah pre-paint. You can see all the different basing elements on there, lots of plasticard and some other bits, some 3D printed bits from Death Ray Designs. Also got the black Vallejo primer, some airbrush thinner and flow improver. As you can see, I've added just a little bit into the pot on my airbrush, and then I'm adding a generous amount of primer. Give it a good mix. Technically, you are supposed to mix these outside of the pot on the airbrush, but I'm lazy. Don't be like me. Quick little test of consistency, and then just getting some good full coverage. I don't like to I kind of treat this primer layer as a base coat. I like to make sure there's nothing kind of left untouched. And here we're going into the next step, which is going to be an application of white ink. I go with straight white. I don't go with gray. I find this yields the most amount of contrast. Others swear by using gray as a midtone. I personally don't find the need for it. As long as you thin the white ink well enough, you're not going to deal with speckling and whatnot. So that's going to give you a good, even, smooth gradient. That's going to be nice and steep, going from the brightest whites to the very darkest blacks. As you can see here, I'm just testing my paint consistency to see if there is any speckling. I'm also seeing my spray pattern just in general to make sure that I can get a nice small one and I'm not getting any spider webbing, which would be too much air pressure and too thin of a paint or ink, causing a lot of running and streaking. Now I'm going to focus on a lot of the top areas here. As I was going through here, I started noticing that I was getting just a tiny little bit of speckling, so I added a little bit more thinner to the mix. Just a few drops, test the consistency, and then carry on. I'm focusing on the top forward edges of all these canopy panels and some of those rounded bits. I'm going to really focus on the top center. As you can see, I'm slowly moving back here, trying to build up that volume. Really trying to pick out that edge without hitting the rest of the top panel. As you can tell, this is a lot different than a standard zenithal highlight. I'm being very selective with where I apply this white ink. I don't want it to go everywhere. I want to try and maintain some level of variation and contrast throughout, even on the very top panels. And as you can see here, from the front and the sides, looks quite different than when looking at it top down. I'm being very careful here to try and avoid overspray on areas that I don't want down below. So I'm just working with the angles of the miniature. As you can see, I'm almost holding this miniature upside down, and that's just to afford me less issues with overspray. Trying to use those hard angles to my advantage. Trying to hit kind of the bottom areas on these little side round areas on the arms. Gonna hit the tops of the legs near the hips. And I will hit a little bit on the back panels, as you can see there. Focusing on those rounded shin areas, trying to get like a nice round bloom of white. Slowly coming together. I'm gonna hit those lower edges of these side panels. And the reason why I'm doing this, it's not necessarily the most realistic, but what it does is drive out that contrast between the very bright top panels and the ones on the sides. If I was putting all that white right up near the top, you wouldn't have that subtle and not so subtle variation between the very brights and the very darks. So this is just the method I go with. Again, it's not always about realism, it's more so about visual interest. So keep this in mind as you are working through this process. Coming back here near the feet and reinforcing a few areas. I'm just coming back in on the top panels because there are a few areas that, as they've completely dried, they've darkened just a little bit. And that's because I'm using a very thinned down white ink. The white ink itself is already fairly thin out of the bottle, but again, I want to avoid that speckling. So I would rather have to come back in and reinforce a few areas than go all out on my first layers. And then now I'm stepping on all my shading. So totally a viable option to do either or. This is just my preferred method. And when I come back in and I reinforce these areas, I'm really just focusing on those most prominent edges and panels, especially the forward-facing ones on the top. And you can see the difference between what we were looking at before versus now. This is much brighter. And all of these areas on top are far brighter than the ones on all of the sides and the back. It's looking pretty good so far. Getting a nice little roundabout view. You can really see all the shading when you look at the miniature from side on, and as I tilt this up, you can see underneath is essentially completely black. This is really what we want to achieve in order to have this really high contrast look. Now the next step, we are going to do a very modest dry brush. We don't want to completely ruin all the work we've done by creating a chalky look, so I'm coming in with a slightly thinned down matte white paint. This is a pure white, and I'm just going to use this to give me just the initial indications of edge highlights. This is going to help once we start applying our red filter over top, because this effectively gives us our base edge highlights without having to go in there with a detail brush and without having to do it with a red paint. We will go back in and refine the edge highlights with some red paint, but we really want to try to avoid a lot of tedious work. So here I'm just testing the consistency of the paint coming off my brush. I'm just using that little Jeep that's on the base because it does have some nice hard angles and some softer ones. So this allows me to see how the paint's coming off the brush before actually applying it to the mech itself. So I'm going to focus on all the top edges as well as the side ones. I like going in a top down and front to back motion. There are going to be instances where I go back underneath the miniature and hit a few areas that are prominently seen from the front and the sides, but largely I'm focusing on those raised areas facing the top as well as the front. And again, you're better off doing a very light touch on this at first and going back in afterwards to reinforce and refine some areas rather than trying to go very heavy-handed right up front. As you can see, there's a lot of edges here that are now really, really popping compared to before. And this is what we want. Going back and forth on those front areas. I'm going around on the feet, but I'm not going high up on the legs because those areas are cast in shadow currently. Quick little 360 and a little view underneath. You can really see, especially on the sides of the legs there, where all of this white paint has caught onto those edges. Looks very sharp. Again, looking underneath, you can see pure black in a lot of those recesses and the areas facing directly down. Now we are going to come in with our red filter. This is a transparent flame red ink from Daler & Rowney. Make sure you get the transparent ink. I just pointed to the little symbol. If you are using an opaque ink, this is not going to work. It's basically going to act like paint. You're not going to have all this volume showing through. You're essentially going to ruin all the previous steps that we've done. So transparent inks and paints are what you want. Coming in here because I see a little hair stuck to the edge of a panel. I'm just getting in there with, got in there with my tweezers, but this is stuck on there with the paint. So I'm just getting in there with the knife to get that out of the way. As I start my application of this red filter, I'm feathering the trigger constantly. I am keeping my airflow on essentially at all times because I want this ink to continually dry very quickly as I'm applying this. The reason being, I do not want to start getting pooling or spider webbing. That's not going to yield nice results either. So I'm taking my time as I build this up and increase the saturation. And you will find, especially early on in those steps there, it was showing off as a little bit pink, and that's just as you're building up the saturation, that white is still showing through quite a bit. Just keep applying layer after layer, very gently and lightly, and eventually you'll have a nice strong red coat. Getting a quick little view, you can still see a lot of that shading showing through. And when we eventually take a look underneath the miniature, you're really going to see the darkness showing through underneath. Because this is a satin ink, it does have some shine to it. So we're not getting a really clear view of what those highlights and shadows are going to look like in the end. Once we apply a matte varnish, all of this additional shine is going to go away and you're really going to see what the volume actually looks like. Now I'm just turning off that light as you saw in my spray booth because that light is kind of affecting my ability to see some of the areas that aren't quite saturated as well. So just turning that off, doing some little spot checks, and then reinforcing areas that I need to. And this is after the complete application of the red filter. Very punchy. We've turned down some of our lighting and turned off some of the lighting to allow for an easier view. Very bright, very punchy. Very nice. And a quick little view underneath. Again, we're still seeing a lot of that black showing through. And this is where the transparent inks really come in handy. All of that pre-shading and pre-highlighting that we've done hasn't been stepped on. We've just added a color tone to it. Hitting the cheat code button on this. So I've gone ahead and applied a gloss varnish and some water transfers for my insignia. I've also gone ahead and added an enamel wash to all those panel lines. This is just to kind of break up those armor panels, add a little bit more visual interest and deep shading. And after this step, I will go ahead and seal this and then add a ultra matte varnish, and that's going to kill all this shine and bring it down to a nice flat finish, which we will take a look at right now. So now that we can see all the shine is gone, you can actually see what these highlights and shadows are going to look like toward the end of the paint job. Very good deep shading on all these non-highlight areas, and those highlight areas are very, very bright. Overall, this red appears to be very bright, but there's actually a lot of darkness in the overall paint scheme. But having those really, really bright highlights and that really dark shading is what makes these look brighter than they actually are. Looking at it from the top, again, it looks like, you know, a reasonably shaded, almost pure red. And then coming back to the side and now underneath, it looks like a very dark red. Exactly what we are going for. I've gone ahead and added my black base layering for all my detail areas. I really enjoy this step. It really helps to break up the miniature into its different component parts. It also helps me map out the areas that I'm going to need to add metallics, do some canopy work, weapon effects, all that stuff. I've also done the base as well because none of the base is going to have any red on it essentially, and I'm going to be starting essentially from scratch on the base when it comes to the layering process. Very satisfying step in my opinion. Not entirely necessary, but it's just something I enjoy doing. We're now going to come in and do our initial refinement of edge highlights. This is just going to be with a good punchy scarlet red. This is Evil Sun Scarlet from Citadel. I am going to trace almost every single panel line and edge, minus all of the panel edges on the undersides of the miniature. When it comes to doing edge highlights, paint consistency is king. Brush control obviously is a very key factor here, but I love to use the side of the tip of my brush along those hard edges. It's almost like a dry brush of sorts with that sharp paintbrush. When it comes to some of those panel edges I can't do that on, I just do my best to maintain control and trace along the edge. It does take practice, but just the name of the game when it comes to miniature painting. Now, this scarlet red that we are applying isn't going to be super visible on the top panels here. It's going to be a lot more visible on the side panels. I do feel this is a necessary step if we want to punch these edge highlights up a lot more. If we go into a brighter red, sometimes it can look a little bit uncanny because with those brighter reds that I'm going to be applying a little bit later on, not having this building the base or the foundation for those edge highlights, when I add the brighter red into smaller areas, it will just look a little bit funny. This is obviously sped up. This is about 2.5 times speed. I am not super fast when it comes to edge highlighting. I generally really take my time because I don't like making mistakes and having to go back and clean them up if I don't need to. Now I'm coming back in here with just a little bit of black ink just to reinforce a few of those recessed panel lines. And now we are going to move into our slightly brighter red edge highlight. I'm using that same Evil Sun Scarlet and I'm adding a little bit of khaki into it. What this helps to do is keep a little bit of warmth. If you just add a little bit of white paint into your red, it is going to turn pink. This still gets a slightly pinkish hue, but adding in the khaki keeps that warmth. It doesn't turn it as pinkish as it would if you were adding in white. And as you're going to see here, I'm really focusing on those more prominent edges, the ones on top, the ones facing forwards, the biggest, sharpest edges. The other ones I'm going to leave with just that standard Evil Sunz Scarlet. And this is just going to add, again, some more subtle variation. And I really want to make sure I don't completely step on all of the previous edge highlights that I've done. Now looking on this top panel here, you can really see the difference between this red and the base red that we have on there. And this is what really drives up that contrast even more. Again, speeding this up so you're not watching an hour plus of edge highlighting. And here we have the miniature completely edge highlighted. We're going to do a quick little 360. Looking at the back side, you can see these edge highlights are a little bit more subtle compared to the ones on the front as well as the top. Now I've added my metallics. Didn't really feel like this was a super necessary thing to add into the video, just like the blocking with black and the decals and things like that. Plenty of other videos for that. Now here I've added my PPC glow as well as my green lasers, which you can find in these videos here that I will link on either side of the screen. And here is the miniature with most of the base work done, as well as the canopy. And this is pretty much it. This is how I do my red armor. It's a very satisfying process, very fun, and I really hope you enjoyed. Hope you enjoyed the video, folks. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Be sure to check out aresgamesandminis.com for all your Battletech needs, and be sure to check out the Camo Specs Online miniature gallery. It's where I get a lot of my stuff uploaded to, and there's a lot of fantastic artists that have their stuff on there. Until next time, take care.